Welcome. Today we are joined by Nicholas Harriger and Andre Cohen, and we are going to be talking about the impact of IDFA deprecation. There's been a lot of talk about this topic with respect to marketing and user acquisition, but with these two guys, what we now have is the ability to talk more generally in terms of product and tools impact. So the focus of our discussion today will be a few things. One, kind of the summary of IDFA deprecation, what it means to the industry. Two, implications to the value chain, and then we'll go into more depth around the product and tools impact. And again, speaking on this, we have Nicholas and Andre. Andre was, just to give some background, was formerly the CTO of New York-based software dev studio White Shoe Media before co-founding Gondola with Nicholas. Also a CTO. Currently, Andre is head of data science at Tilting Point after the acquisition of Gondola by Tilting Point. Nicholas has a background in law. Nicholas was formerly an IP lawyer, but worked at White Shoe Media. I think you co-founded that with Andre as well before starting Gondola. Nicholas, today you are the founder of 8-Bit Coaching, which is a technical executive coaching consultancy. But just to kind of tee up the conversation in terms of like why you guys are actually really great guys to talk about IDFA deprecation impact on product and tools. Nicholas or Andre, could you guys talk about what was Gondola and what was the service doing?
Sure. I'll just take this, from a high level. So as you mentioned before, Andre and I first joined forces when we were doing indie games together.
Yeah.
And, this is like the early 2000s, and optimization, very, very quickly became important, especially, once in-app purchases and then free-to-play and all that were emerging. And what Gondola was doing, we were focused on two different things. So the basic premise was, we have to understand our players better. There might be 1 million players in our game, but they are, all really belong into very, very different segments. So we want to understand our player base. And then with Gondola, do two things. First of all, we were doing dynamic price optimization, which essentially meant there is a $5 gem package, but depending on the attributes of a player, you might want to give different gem amounts to different players. Something that is has been successfully done in airlines, rental cars, hotels for many, many decades. And then the other thing that we were doing, and specifically we're focusing on later, was offer optimization, right? So you have the starter bundle, the intro pack, and the expert offer. One is $2.99, one is $4.99, one is $7.99. And with a machine learning algorithm, we were able at Gondola to take the data that we were receiving from the game developers, do some fancy segmentation around that, and therefore attribute different offers to different kinds of players. And I think that ties directly into our discussion today, because a lot of the things that we did at Gondola would be much harder today, if not impossible. And I think that's a relatively good vantage point to start this discussion.
Right. And so just to get some of the product folks up to speed, I mean, if you're a marketer, if you're in UA, you talk about IDFA deprecation literally like every day. There's conversations that happen just essentially on a daily basis, literally. But for the product people and maybe executives, can you guys talk about how the business impact of IDFA deprecation, just to get those folks kind of caught up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, once again, I'm going to take this, from the more business point of view.
Right.
And then Andre can, go deep with us on the technicalities a little later. But before the recent changes, it essentially worked like this, right? So with every single ad impression, the user's IDFA, which, by the way, means ID for advertisers. I think everybody goes by IDFA, but just, to explain the acronym. So the IDFA was recorded by the developer and or the MMP, so the mobile measurement partner. So now if the user clicked on the ad and afterward installed and ran the game, the IDFA of the user would be sent back to the developer and the MMP. So that way the MMP was able to create a perfect link between the ad campaign and how that generated each paid install for the game. And that's obviously very, very valuable information, because you can see where you spent your money and what the impact is, and then you can replicate and do more of that. After the initial iOS 4 announcement, 14, it became clear that the IDFA in its current form would not continue to exist, but it would rather require an explicit permission from the user. So instead of an opt-out that we had all these years before, and that opt-out was buried somewhere deep in your settings, it will now be an opt-in. And I think we've all seen the markups by now with that native iOS prompt reading, and I'm quoting here, app X, whatever the name of the app is, would like permission to track you across apps and websites owned by other companies. Your data will be used to deliver personalized ads to you. And then the options you're faced with is allow tracking or ask app not to track. Now, we all don't have hard numbers on that, but just like on this message and the options that you will be given, I think the likely result will be that 90%, if not more, of the users will opt out. So if that's the case, the IDFA is essentially dead as a data point. And so the question is, where do we go from here?
Right. And maybe I could also just try to simplify it for some people, because I know it's a little bit difficult to understand for some folks, especially, the dumb executive types, but like myself. But basically, so you have an app, you have an install, and then you're trying to figure out, where does this install come from? Was it an organic? And if you're running like multiple ad campaigns across multiple channels, you're like, well, was this from this Facebook campaign? Was this from this Google thing? Was this from something else? And so if you don't know where this install is coming from because you can identify it, then you're basically shooting in the dark. So that's kind of the importance of that. And then to your point about the opt-in. So now you have to say explicitly, yes, I want to be tracked. And I think there have been a number of studies, but very sketchy. So if you see some of the studies out there that, yeah, the opt-in is 50% or whatever, I would say, once you look under the hood, it's like, wow, this is a very sketchy study. So I think the safe conclusion, at least for the moment, is to really assume probably something like 10 to 20% is my personal opinion. But go ahead.
I would say at best. I mean, honestly, I was just reading it to you. If you see this on your screen, it sounds like spyware. It just sounds bad, right? And it's just like, what's the benefit? I don't want personalized ads. And I think people will just opt out. But to the point you were just making, about the user acquisition, I mean, this is obviously what will be heavily affected. And I think a way to think about it is that you just lose the causality chain, right? You lose the chain that you had before, very reliably established between different campaigns. Different campaigns can just mean, different kind of visuals, right? You run 5 different, video ads and you want to figure out which one is the best, and the actual install. And so in some ways, this throws us like over 100 years back. There's this marketing pioneer, I think his name was John Wanamaker. He had this famous quote where he said, like, half of the money I spent on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half, right? And in some ways, we're back to that. And as you said, shooting in the dark. And what are you going to do? But I actually want to kick it to Andre here. You're
actually doing this stuff, right? You're optimizing bids, you're creating LTV models. So what are like the main things that have, to Nicholas's point, gone out the window?
Well, anyone that depended on knowing where a player comes from is taking a hit for this, right? And I think with the industry over the last 5 years kind of got really accustomed to knowing the source, right?
Yeah.
Like when we started at Gondola, we didn't even really participate in MMP discussions. And then it took a while to figure out how it worked. Also, I think when it was like 2 or 3 years ago, there used to be, a big discussion about publishers and do you count the revenue across organics and paid versus just the paid users, right?
Sure.
And so that's the evolution, right? So what people get hit by this? Anyone doing the things that Gondola was doing, 100% get hit by this, right? Because imagine like if you're a game designer or a game producer, what's the easiest A/B test you can do to improve your game? Is to change the first offer you show them, the user. Do you show $9.99 as the first offer or $2.99? The best way to do that A/B test or to improve the monetization is just to know where the player comes from. Like if the UA department spent $1 million acquiring users, you probably have a good idea of the guy's probably worth something. Let's show the $9.99.
Yeah.
If the guy comes out of nowhere from an app store, just show at $2.99. You're probably safer. You have nothing to lose because you didn't pay for that user. So yeah, so I mean, those are the things that are really taking a hit. Obviously, MMPs though are the thing that I'm really intrigued about. Their whole business model has kind of been pulled, like the rug has been pulled out of them.
Right.
They're discussing, right, probabilistic attribution. That's like the new politically correct word to use on the street for a lot of other things. Takes one to know one. And
so what are your thoughts on MMPs? Because there are, so one, the MMPs have been incredibly vocal, right? Like you got webinars every week, you got white papers, you got this, you got that. And then you have another set of folks who are basically saying MMPs are completely dead. And so where do you guys sit on that?
Well, it's funny you say that, right? AppsFlyer was really vocal. Just didn't say a word for like a month or two. Like it was complete radio silence from my perspective. So not even the MMPs have like different strategies, if you will, right? Okay. Like I think AppsFlyer and Singular were all like ganging up on this whole, we'll work together, we'll make it work. But in the end, they all converged in the same thing, which is we'll just play along with Apple. From a data scientist, I can tell you that the biggest value I get out of MMPs now after iOS 14 is standard data. Like they are the new flurry of analytics. They have highly standardized APIs. You know how much money you make in the game by cohort. Even if you don't know where the cohorts come from, it's still something. And so for publishers like me and Tilting Point, you know, to me, that's the juicy thing, is that we have a way to talk to every game, regardless of who made it and what platforms they use, to run MMP. It's easy. And they're the only ones that have such few features, right? Like they don't do, you know, they're not Amplitude where they're trying to do like fancy graphs.
Right.
But
what is that worth to you? Is that worth the same amount you're paying today?
Is it worth $50,000 a month? That's the question. I can't see it. I really can't see the value. I mean, there's no reason to, I think, use them right now. And the hope is that they have some added value, right? The hope is that they may take some of the headaches away. And I mean, I was discussing this with other people. And, you know, one of the things that I've heard a lot is, you know, MMPs are great because when something goes wrong with tracking, analytics, attribution, you can call them up. You can't call Facebook up and Google up that easily, or TikTok, and ask why my players are not being tracked correctly.
Right.
So I think they have to downsize unless they come up with the secret sauce for, you know, probabilistic attribution, maybe. But then it also begs the question, you know, if you're going into this whole probabilistic world, you have to also do probabilities on a lot of other metrics, right? You have to do probabilities on revenue because you're no longer certain of what revenue comes from organic versus paid. You don't know what the install numbers are, right? So it's a whole world of pain for them. So maybe, you know, if they succeed at this, like in 2 years, which is probably the time it's going to take for the industry to adapt. In 2 years, they'll be worth $50,000 again a month. But for this first year, it's going to be very bumpy, very bumpy. Which is the opportunity for other people, right? For other companies to come up. There's this one moment of time right now where you could come up with a new startup.
So what about impact to other major players in the ecosystem? So, you know, we talked about MMPs. The other big thing that people talk about is that ad revenue, because of the lack of targeting, goes down. Do you guys have a perspective on whether it's like the game companies or studios that depend on advertising, whether it's like hyper casual or idle games, or other major players that are impacted by this?
Yeah, I mean, if you like ads and if you depend on the ad monetization, I'm personally really curious myself on what's going to happen. I mean, this is a financial ecosystem problem. It's not a math problem at this point. The question is, when you pull out a major factor on how to advertise, and there's a clear dip in revenue from it, right? Because IDFA does improve ad monetization. That's a fact.
Yeah. When
you remove that, will the economy of ads normalize itself again, back down to some other thing where maybe modern iPhones get, better ad monetization than the crappy iPhone 4. Like, back in the old days, way back in the day, when device type mattered. As far as other things, that people depend on, who knows? I mean, I think the big ones is obviously, I think the ad world. It's going to be creative optimization. Is going to be really interesting. Mostly because I think a lot of startups that kind of failed in the last 3 years can basically take their code out of the drawer and put it up again and be back into business. Because 3 years ago, right, like when we were doing Gondola, the cool thing was click-through rate optimization. It was like doing A/B tests with campaigns, A/B tests with creatives, iterating fast was the thing, right? And it was the IDFA and machine learning from the big players in ads, in the ad networks, that killed all of that. But now that you don't have IDFA and you don't have that machine learning component anymore for audience building, hey, you can now go back to click-through rate optimization, which is a really interesting niche of technologies. So you have to adapt back again to that as well.
Can I add something regarding the normalization? Because I think that is something that I think is going to be very interesting to observe, and where I would not really dare to make any predictions. But I think our industry is special in the way that, just starting from the IDFA, so we, as you guys have illustrated, we obviously depend on it in two different ways. So on the one hand, and let's say monetization depends on it in two different ways. Revenue depends on it in two different ways. So first of all, there are all the developers out there that need, for their sophisticated, deep, long games, that they need to attract high value players, right? And the only way to get the high value players is to have a significant marketing budget and then deploy it, in the most efficient fashion in order to, get the players into your, let's not forget, free game, right? That you think, will monetize sufficiently and give you the LTV that you need in order to, keep the lights on in your company and also continue to scale your UA efforts. So that's one. Then the other thing is, as you guys said, hyper casual, etc. But not only hyper casual. I still have this rule of thumb in my head that for a lot of games, about a third of all the revenue that a game is making or that a publisher is making actually comes from ad revenue. So it's a very, very significant revenue source, right? Now, what are the highest paying ads in mobile games? It's, installs for other mobile games, right? Because that's your target audience. That's what you want to go for. So as we have, described, these will not be so efficient anymore. So all of a sudden, on the one end of the spectrum, the tool to get the kind of players that I want for the kind of money that I can spend, has been made way more dull than it was before. And that, simultaneously pushes down the value of all of the ads and therefore the revenue opportunities for people that partly or heavily rely on advertising revenue. So eventually, I think for a certain amount of time, unless something magic happens, this is a little bit of a race to the bottom where it just will be pushed down, to see where's the new floor for the value, right? What is the first category still willing to spend on the kind of players that they can get now without the attribution that was in place before? And then what does that translate into, click-through ratios, impressions, and all of this, and how much money other people can make? And I think then there will be an uptick again. But what I would not dare to make any predictions on is A, where is that floor? Just like on average, for an ad impression, an install, etc. And B, how long it will take to reach that, because that might be, only a couple of months. It's a fast-paced business, but it might also be longer. And there will be a lot of insecurity in that very specific market. And as we all know, insecurity, usually not exactly what boosts things up. So I have no answer there, but I think it's a very curious problem.
Well, just to go into a really funny angle, now that you're going all into finance and the bottom cap and everything like that, is what about Android, right? Because they are still having the same ecosystem. Yeah. So now you're going to have developers making games.
All of a sudden, that's going to be the prime platform.
That's going to be like the cream of the.
It's like I'm getting my really fancy users on Android now. Interesting approach. Yeah, could be.
Yeah, they might actually become more profitable than iOS now for once.
But if we're going to close the loop in terms of the ecosystem impact, so MMPs dire, I think to your point, Andre, maybe some of these companies that have more specialist approaches like Bidalgo on creatives optimization, stuff like that, they might be okay, potentially, based upon what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, the Dalco is a funny one, right? Because to some degree, they are doing and they do ad optimization and creative optimization and campaign optimization. And I think they're just about to have their first, real challenge in, getting into machine learning to figure out how to do these kinds of optimizations without attribution. And the moment you get into it, which is, I think, the funny part, is now they are in the same boat as MMPs, right? They have to do probabilistic attribution. They won't know exactly what players come from which ads. So they're going to have to do some fancy probability. And they're going to be doing the same technologies as ROAS and LTV that everyone else is trying to do. So actually their business, which used to be really focused, is now having to tackle a much broader problem, right? It's like what's why I always find interesting about LTV companies. Like if you're doing LTV, seriously doing LTV, you're not a gaming company. I mean, that's silly. Why are you just a gaming company? LTV exists in every industry. You could be doing the same core code and apply it to cars. You can do it for consumer goods. You can work for Whole Foods. It's the same algorithm. So these companies are about to, I think, get a bit more of like the real world problems.
And then in terms of like other players, like whether it's ad networks or is there anyone else who is negative to, so it sounds like what we're saying is if ad revenue goes down, that can't be good for ad networks. So their revenue likely drops by whether you believe Facebook at 50% or even more.
Yeah. No, I mean, what's interesting, I think, is that we have to start distinguishing between Facebook, Google, and things like TikTok from the rest, right? Because they have a real advantage that the ads you place inside their own apps has a completely different profile and a completely different background of data than the ads you run through Unity, right? Even Unity is questionable because they also have a big backend data aggregation system now. But yeah, like if you're advertising via, I don't know, pick your MoPub marketplace or some of these smaller players, it's going to be hard. But within the apps, like if you imagine you're in Facebook, right? Think about all the things you have there, right? You know the person, you know their location, you know the games that they played. If they log into games, you know the games they've logged into. So I think the marketplace and the targeting is going to move into these ecosystems more, right?
Well, just reality check here. It's not like Facebook already got the lion's share of this kind of marketing spend before. So in some ways, what you're saying, Andre, is they will become even more important for lack of other alternatives than they were before, because as you said, once a player has, once a Facebook user has logged in, they have all of these different attributes, right? They know what content the user engages with, what they like, what they comment on, what they forward, whether they watch the new PUBG trailer and whatnot. And those are obviously very, good attributes that at least allow you to narrow down the pool of players, potential installs that you're looking at. Even if you cannot have the end-to-end attribution, you're still fishing, I guess, with bigger bait in a smaller pond, so you have higher chances of success. Yeah, is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah, I misspoke. Yeah, Facebook is already. I mean, it's why Facebook probably originally had the stance of not applying IDFA, right? I think now they're kind of becoming more murky about their stance on IDFA, but originally they said, no, we don't need IDFA to continue doing our business. Because they already have, what's the user base of Facebook? How many billion?
2 billion. But actually, Joe, I have a question for you. Since you are the game executive in the room here, right? The one actually doing this and applying these, when you hear all of this, all of these optimization tools that have historically given you at least a 10 to 20% increase in revenue, right? And obviously, at NBC and Sega and Fun Plus, all of these places you've worked at, you've used all of them. So they're all taking a hit. I think, to what degree remains to be seen, but they're all taking a hit. So what's the monetization strategy from here forward? As a game exec, how do you compensate for this?
Yeah, I mean,
what are you going to do?
Yeah, I've talked about this before on the sort of Deconstructor Fun podcast, but the approach that I'm taking with this is that we're assuming, and this is kind of a big assumption, is that we can't do targeting. I'm a little bit more negative on Facebook because I'm not sure if you can pay as much as you used to before with like, VO or AEO types of campaigns. You can't pay that $30 per user and feel good about it. So assuming that well targeting is going away, and that's kind of I think that's a safer assumption, but I have spoken to, I'm not going to say who, but fairly senior folks who were at some of these bigger companies who still think that there's going to be somehow a way to do well targeting. But if I assume that goes away, and if I assume that on the lower end that the monetization of non-paying user goes away, then how does that impact my business from a product perspective? And so the way that we've been thinking about that is like, how do we optimize design mechanics to go for higher conversion with lower payer buckets, right? And so we're not assuming we're going to be able to get those 10,000, 100,000 payer buckets before, but that we'll have to shift monetization to lower payer buckets, but with higher conversion. And so then the way that translates to the product is, okay, well, what are the mechanics, right? So then that makes things like Battle Pass, which typically has higher conversion, higher engagement, more attractive. That makes and I won't give away everything that we're doing, but that makes us think about what are the things that we can do with less information. And to your point as well, Andre, does that mean we can't optimize against players coming into the game? Yes. We don't think we'll be able to. We know that this is a whale, so we're going to give them that $50 or $99.99 offer right away. We're not going to be able to do things like that. And so that's kind of what we're assuming. And so then we think about, well, then in terms of the tools that we create and in terms of the experience that we have for our players and the mechanics and things like that, we're kind of banking on moving more towards the middle. We're banking on trying to be more like Supercell and less like Game of War, less like some of these more hardcore games. So that's how we approach it.
So bottom line, rather than going for the small but incredibly valuable bucket of players that can spend individually 6-digit amounts in a game,
right.
As we've all seen, and depending on what genre you're in, whether that's social casino or some mid-core game or that's very well possible. But from a design point of view, that doesn't only mean you would have to from a UA perspective, you would have to be very targeted in order to justify spending $30 or whatever on acquiring players like these, which will not be possible anymore. But you were saying we're taking a different turn during the design phase of the game, acknowledging that will not be possible anymore. We're not going to design a game with that amount of depth
Right.
and that amount of, well, let's just say year-long runway for these kind of players that can make up 80% of your revenue or something. But we're going to spreading it wider, going for higher conversion rate, but with players that maybe only have a lifetime value, let's say between $5 and $50 or something.
Right, and to try and optimize that, and I would actually recommend the audience to actually watch, especially the later parts of Andre's talk on player journeys. But when you think about, so if you're orienting around payer buckets, for example, right, and you're orienting around a certain payer bucket, let's say it's $300 instead of $10,000, then again, if we're talking about tools and we're talking about optimization, then, and again, I don't want to give away all our secrets, but when you think about that analysis of what the players do and how the players actually become a $300 payer bucket player, and then you think about the player adjacency, right? So then how do you optimize? And this is something that Andre speaks about in his talk, which I'll provide a link to. So again, I'm not to try and give everything away, but then when you map that out, and then how do you then provide analysis, tools, mechanics, things to then make sure that $300 bucket becomes as large as possible, so that from a revenue perspective, yes, we're bringing the ARPU down, but we're increasing the conversion. Can we get revenue up?
No, it's really interesting because I haven't thought nearly as much about like the whole ecosystem of games as I think you, Joe, have been doing. But it's true that hardcore games are going to have to become slightly less hardcore to be sustainable. I think that's somewhat of what you're saying, because you can't get just the 1,000 player DAO and be a very happy company, right? You have to broaden your audience.
We think so. I mean, I'm not 100%.
I think
sure,
no. I like where it's going. I like where this
Yeah.
is going, and also hyper casual has to give a little more for the players and increase the value of that player a little more than just
hyper casual. Just one note on that is Eric Seifert. For those who don't know him, he's like the marketing expert, but he made a point about hyper casual, which is that he thinks that Apple just doesn't like them. So regardless of whether it's this or something else, Apple's gonna get rid of them from the top three, right?
Yeah.
So hyper casual are in 2020 are what the fart apps were in like 2013 that all just got banned from one day to another because Apple didn't like them.
I think Apple gets what it wants eventually. So I wouldn't fight the trend. I try to figure out how to benefit from the trend.
But one other thing that just came up and that I was thinking about was, so moving forward, how do you actually soft launch games, right? And I think this is another Joe question, because back in the day, you would create like 5 different ads. You would pick your market that is you would, I don't know, go to Australia or New Zealand or something. You had the different ads, one with the main character, one with the battlefield, one is green, one is red, one is blue. And then you would test them and see what converts. And it worked so well because you had the attribution, right? You knew exactly, going back to that chain between, what specific ad and creative, generated what kind of install. And then you would see how that player would behave. And that gave you a lot of valuable information, not only around, should I even like continue to develop this game and, get it, out of alpha and beta into launch state, but also, if I decide to launch, I already have a pretty good idea regarding my UA campaign. At least I'm in a much better spot than if I wouldn't have done this. So once again, question for the game executive here, with all this and these limitations, how are you going to guys go about it?
I think you still do soft launch just to get, for us, and more from the perspective of like mid-core, hardcore games, understanding what your ARPU curve looks like across your audience. And but I would say that you may not see as big of a initial marketing spend. It's going to be a little bit more iterative. It's going to be, in my opinion, and Andre is probably better suited to answer this question, but like, it's, if you're going to be trying to optimize against your D3 or D7 ROAS, you're like modifying your budgets on that basis, then if you don't have good visibility into what that actually is, you're probably gonna slow down, or you're not gonna be running as many campaigns as you typically would. It's going to be a little bit slower, a little bit more iterative. So it may be more of like slower buildups rather than like big marketing pushes from the beginning. I don't know if you would agree with that, Andre, or not.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 parts to the soft launching, right, Nicholas, that you brought up. I think there used to be the click-through, optimization. Like, if you're working with IP, right? Like, do you pick? No, I think I'm going with the Indiana Jones or going with Tomb Raider. I don't know which one to use for my new game. Let's try in Canada and see which one people like more. That you can still do, right? You still have impressions and you still have click-throughs and ads. What you're missing is you don't have the ARPU. So going to Joe, right? Going forward, I think people are going to just separate the 2 out completely. You can do click-through rate optimization and figure out what IP is best or what kind of things people want. Or they want the match 3, or they're more interested in the city builder version of the game. You can do that. But then as far as inside the game, you might as well, in my opinion, just assume one ARPU curve, right? One LTV curve. Like, don't care about like which ad comes from, like who comes from what. Who cares? Because I mean, the variance and the noise, and by definition, most people are not Zynga and running big soft launches. So you might as well just assume roughly plus or minus 20%.
But the click-through ratio is, in those circumstances, not that valuable. I mean, this is something that, we mainly used to worry about when it came to monetizing our games with ad revenue. But so if I run these 5 different campaigns, let's just say I have the blue, the red, the yellow, and the green ad, right? And I can see, okay, great, the yellow has a higher click-through ratio. Okay, what does that tell me? That doesn't really tell me anything, whether somebody clicked, if that led to an install. That's the first disconnect. And then, but more importantly, once I have an install, there's no differentiation between the player that looked at the thing for 5 seconds, maybe he didn't even open the app, versus the one that played really deeply and, and started spending. And so, I mean, as you said, you might as well just assume one ARPU curve, but I think that takes a lot of the value of soft launching. I don't think you can get away without soft launching. Don't get me wrong. I'm just thinking, there is another, profound ecosystem impact in, the way games are made and launched that that people have to get inventive with.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, just maybe to kind of like unpack this a little bit. So soft launch in terms of like technical soft launch to get rid of all your bugs and stuff, that's probably still there. The optimization side in terms of like, figuring out how to improve features against your whatever your entire audience is, that makes sense. And then I think it's just I would say that the part so I think that all that exists, but like maybe the optimization around the marketing side, that part of the soft launch, that probably changes a little bit. And then to the point earlier, when you hard launch, I think that it's not going to be as strong or as big of a push.
Yeah, I mean, what Nicholas was pointing out is like the thing that I worry a lot is, you can have an ad that has great conversion, but brings horrible players, right, for ARPU purposes. And you can have an ad that has horrible conversion rate, but the players that do convert are super valuable.
Yeah.
And that speaks to, I think, live optimization. I think we're going to the era where you really do have to your point, Joe, create very different player journeys and just get used to it.
Yeah, I think there was this whole thing before about having these very deceptive ads, and then that would improve your IPMs, right? And so you have great IPMs, but then on the back end, once people started tracking all the way down to the LTVs, and it's like, actually, great front end, terrible back end, this actually doesn't make sense. But now we may not have that back end picture, so so you got to be more careful. You got to use a little bit more intuition about, okay, does this make sense or not?
Yeah. All going to come back to game design.
All right. Well, maybe we could wrap this up with a discussion around opportunities. So as with any big change, there are winners. And, right now we've been talking more about the losers, but what about the winners in terms of like, based on these technical changes, are there going to be new opportunities? Are there going to be, what kind of new players? I mean, you guys talked about probabilistic, attribution, or some people are talking about this MMM mixed media model. I haven't, I just kind of listened to it. I don't follow it that much, but like, who could be potential winners in all of this?
Well, so I think that just to state the obvious here, when the incumbents in any market take a big hit, in the sense that they're losing their technical advantage, right? And thereby they might be, going back to the adjust example, might also be losing some customers and all of that. That I don't want to say that puts everybody back to square one, but I think there will be a significant opportunity for smaller companies, newer companies, companies that are not dragging around. I mean, 200 people that have not this gigantic operation. The bigger the company, the harder it is to change course. So if you have, a hungry, creative 3-people team, I think they can now really make a dent, because A, the incumbents are not going to be remotely as strong anymore as they were, and B, users, game executive, product managers, etc., are going to be much more open to new solutions, because the game plan that they have been applying for all of these years is clearly not working anymore. So I think that just creates an environment where people are much more susceptible to new outside of the box creative solutions.
And are you talking more from a tools perspective or from a content perspective? It kind of sounds like you're talking about like a new company that does some of the MMP functions that Andre was saying is valuable, but with a dramatically lower cost structure. Is that what you're talking?
No, I'm talking generally from an optimization tool perspective. I
Okay,
mean,
okay.
like, whether that is your general analytics provider, whether that is your creative optimization tool, whether it's the attribution, all of these things that are like table stakes, where it's not really a question, if a game publisher uses them or not. It's just the question, which one do they use, right? But you need all of them, right? When those guys all have are compromised in the way that their tools work and therefore their business works, I think that creates a lot of opportunity for new and smaller companies. And once again, I'm stating the obvious here, because it's hard for a big company to change course and reinvent all of this while simultaneously keeping the lights on and paying the bills and all of that, and also trying to maintain the current customer base. And it's just way easier, bottom line, for a new player, like a new optimization tool that comes into the market, to go toe-to-toe with an incumbent than it was half a year ago. That's what I'm saying. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And that will also, this opportunity will hopefully stir up some ingenuity on the side of, tool makers and young, hungry folks that have some good ideas. Andre, do you see some technical opportunities? Like, where's the...
I was actually going to take, you inspired me in thinking, and I actually thought just right now in completely different direction. And it's like now that marketing is less known or attributable and provable, I think there's a huge hunger for a lot of tools that used to exist to come back, right? Hey Zap, social network in a game, refer a friend to a different game. Think about it, even in normal discussions now, I hear, can we put coupon codes in? Can I refer a friend and you plug in the 7-character code and you get 20 gems? It's something that I think marketers and game developers would be really into it again. A year ago, they would say, "Get out! That's garbage. I'm not putting your logo in my home screen, right? The Hey Zap button has no place in my game." But now all of a sudden it makes sense again. Right? It's worth the concept, or green or open feign, similar thing. If you create a network of gamers, and you can forward each other games, that's I think really interesting. The same thing was just with these playables, right? Any kind of playable or widget version of a game, something that requires less interaction than having to go to the App Store, download the game, wait for it to install, load the game. If it's something that you can show a QR code and it opens the game immediately, or you're browsing the App Store and you can immediately have 30 seconds of play, that is now it's something interesting, right? I mean, just look at with playable ads, right? There was a huge gush of companies doing playables now. So there you go. I think so that's a big opportunity. The other opportunity, the one that I'm really passionate about, is you can only go back to how things were last year or this year if you have end-to-end player journey mapping. Everyone needs to have it now, which is really funny. Because of the lack of IDFA, everyone has some stake at creating predictive LTVs and having to do predictive attribution. The game designer needs to know, right, for creating different player journeys. The MMPs have to know in order to be worth anything. Ad networks want to know in order to sell themselves to games, right? Hey, look, our campaigns, look at your ARPU. They need to advertise it. So everyone is going to have to start thinking about the whole picture. And I'm just going to say, I think Unity has a good shot at this because they've been kind of bad at the game of, back-end systems and analytics, but they've been ramping up really fast. And I think it's the perfect timing for them to actually put all the data. If they can just put all the acquisitions into one and crunch it into a little ball, they're one of the few people that can do it.
Yeah, they're going to have to figure something out to offset the advertising decline that's coming.
Yes, that's coming.
There you go. That's exactly what I would do if I was in their shoes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's about it, guys. Thank you so much for your time. There you have it. Product implications of IDFA deprecation. I'll have links to contact you guys if people want to get in touch with you. But do you guys have any final message for the audience?
One more thing and I'm not going to open up this discussion again, but I think gaming would be well advised to just look at other industries, because very, very few industries out there have had the luxury that we had of, having this end-to-end attribution, right? And obviously when there is the opportunity, you want to take advantage of that. But very few other industries have that. But at the same time, there are a lot of other industries that are, very successful at marketing and very successful at monetizing their products. So I'm sure, there's something to be learned from old school businesses out there. So that's what I want to end with.
Awesome. Andre?
I think I think the next 6 months, you should aggressively try everything you see, because literally anything could be the next big thing, I think, in terms of attribution and optimization. And right now, everyone's probably has like 7 lines of code. So they're all starting at exactly the same level of, skill, and they need data. So from the data scientist perspective, I'm going to say, help them out. They need data. Sign up, try something new, see if it works, and we'll see what happens in 6 months.
All right. Sound good, guys. All right. Thanks. And
Thank you, Joe.
yeah, that's it. Bye.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Bye.